So then, without further ado, guys, welcome to this data series virtual roundtable on the convergence of data and IoT. Today hosted by the Things Network and OpenOcean. So my name is Mike Reiner. I'm a venture partner at OpenOcean. We're a Series A stage investment fund based in Europe, focused on data-intensive B2B software companies. And obviously, due to the significant influence of IoT on the exponential growth of data, it's an important trend and topic for us, which is why we're here today. Before we start, briefly want to give you a bit of background on Data Series. So we started Data Series as an initiative out of OpenOcean roughly 1.5 years ago. And the goal was to engage with top founders and executives of data-intensive companies to share relevant insights. Right? And it was important to us to build this kind of as an open platform to be able to engage with all kinds of other companies and also VCs to have these kind of discussions. And this manifested into two main things. One is an online publication that we have on Medium, that enables us to essentially share those insights of the discussions we're having online with, with a wider audience. And also we're working with writers from across the globe on how data is transforming industries, and also to share lessons learned on how data processing with, for instance, AI techniques such as deep learning, NLP, etc. The second component is also over here. These are the events. Typically, we do these roundtable events physically in a city. Now, in COVID-19 times, we switched to a virtual format, which actually also has its own nice dynamic because it enables us to connect people cross-geo in a better way. So we've been very much enjoying those sessions as well. And after this session, what we typically also want to do is, as an ongoing thing, if you want to be connected to any other industry leaders, part of what we're doing with Data Series is exactly this, connecting you to your peers, also in other industries, also with people that has been for any of the previous roundtable discussions that we had on various topics such as intelligent automation, AI themes, or open source, etc. So if you want to host a roundtable with us in the future, let us know. Happy to look into this together. Or if you want to be connected to peers, reach out to us. I'm very happy to do so. Finally, before we start, just want to mention that we're recording the session. But I want to clearly state the following, that if you're mentioned anything in this call that you'd rather not have out there, just let us know after the call, and we make sure that we're going to remove it. First and foremost, the session is for us to share, right, and be open about what we've experienced and share lessons learned. And second, we would love to use this recording also to share it with a wider audience. But again, if there's anything that comes up that you don't want to share, just let us know, we cut it out. But then please make sure to share this or let me know right after the call or by tomorrow morning, the latest. So without further ado, typically we start with a round of introductions. We keep those short, roughly 20 seconds to 30 seconds max. So I'd like to ask all of you to just briefly say who you are and maybe something you're passionate about. And because it's hard to do this in a clockwise format that you would typically do at a roundtable, I'm just going to call out the names one by one. And why don't I start with Ferry?
My name is Ferry Grijpink. I'm a senior partner based in Amsterdam for McKinsey. I lead our Center for Advanced Connectivity, where we look at how new technologies influence businesses. So I do a lot of work in IoT.
Perfect. Next, Rob.
Hey, Rob Tiffany. I'm the VP and head of IoT strategy at Ericsson. Thing I'm passionate about, I have a foundation called the Moab Foundation that's using IoT and analytics to help out with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Great. Sam?
Hi everyone. Sam George. I'm the Vice President of Azure IoT at Microsoft. Been doing this for several years now, and have just been delighted to watch, customers and partners be able to benefit from IoT. Our big focus is on simplicity, like driving simplicity into IoT and solving all of the tough problems so that, customers and partners can benefit from it easily.
Great. Alistair?
Alistair Fulton. I'm General Manager of Semtech's wireless and sensing business. I spend my life worrying about LoRa primarily, which is a simple, low-cost, low-energy, long-range connectivity solution. Largely because I spent my background in building IoT solutions and platforms, etc. And it's too damn hard to connect everything. So I spend my life trying to fix that problem.
Great. Pilgrim?
I'm Pilgrim Beart. I'm CEO of DevicePilot. I've been involved in a number of startups in IoT, including Antonova, AlertMe, which became Hive, and now running DevicePilot. We provide service monitoring for connected devices. So when people have deployed their devices, we're a SaaS that helps them understand whether they're working or not and deliver an excellent service with them. And I think what I'm really passionate about is it seems that the use case for IoT is delivering efficiency, making the world better, and revolutionizing a lot of things that need revolutionizing. So I think it's very exciting to me that almost all our customers are clearly making the world better by what they do. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Perfect. Katja, see you joined.
Hi everyone. So I'm a partner at OpenOcean together with Mike. And at OpenOcean we invest in fundamental technologies, software mainly, but sometimes hardware across Europe. I am an investor for a very long time. In the past I have invested for several corporations like Samsung and EMC, Dell and Siemens. And some of these cutting edge technologies were related to IoT and new things coming, whether it's healthcare or it's autonomous driving or things like that. So new wave of technologies. So yeah, so very glad to see you, and let's discuss very exciting topic today.
Thank you, Katja. And then last but not least, our moderator, Wienke, hand it over to you.
Hey, hello, hi, welcome everybody. My name is Wienke Giezeman, CEO and co-founder of the Things Network. And we support and operate a global LoRa WAN network of almost 500,000 devices and 20,000 IoT gateways. And we mainly do that by supporting developers and making their life easier to not focus on the core IoT technology, but focus on their IoT app. And yeah, main thing I'm passionate about is of course indeed also the end use case that's driving the value, but also providing a very like simple tool set to allow to do that. So yeah, let's get started. Mike, I think we have on the agenda that I give a bit of a perspective what I see that is the feedback I've seen and what we see happening in the developer ecosystem in IoT across the world. And after that, Ferry is going to give a perspective from what McKinsey sees now many years already into IoT. And then we'll hand it. We're going over to discussing several subjects. So yeah, Mike, you're okay with that, right? This we agree on. Yeah, perfect. Then we're going to continue. So what we do with the Things Network is we started in 2015. We jumped on the IoT bandwagon when like these large predictions from many analyst companies came that the IoT is the next big thing. And when we started, we focused on the technology called LoRa, which is a radio frequency technology that allows you to add sensors and connect them to the cloud, basically. And the first thing we saw when we started in 2015 was that making an IoT app was actually pretty hard. Like the scope of competences that you need, from radio frequency knowledge to sensor knowledge to base station knowledge to cloud knowledge is very broad. So we thought, okay, this is only going to fly and it's only going to scale all these cool ideas if we're going to make sure we're going to abstract all this complexity behind simple APIs and simple tools and great content and good developer engagement. So we thought, okay, we're going to go into IoT, but we're going to only focus first on the developers and making their life easier, and that created an ecosystem that we now grew out to 110,000 developers across the world on the thingsnetwork.org platform. And the business hypothesis is that if we enable them good enough, they will come up with enterprise questions and we can start to upsell enterprise services. And that happened. So we started making it very easy to build these wireless sensors networks. And then we had Deutsche Bahn, the German railway organization, come to us and say, okay, now we use your platform to develop and to evaluate, but now we want to scale. And then a whole range of other feature requests come over, and that's where we build our commercial product on. And now after 5 years, we support WeWork with measuring the occupancy of their meeting rooms around the world. And now adding all kinds of COVID-19 applications. We're surfacing Wilms in shipping, adding IoT networks on ships. And one thing that these customers have in common, and is something we've learned, is that IoT by enterprise is mostly used as a component of their enterprise architecture that needs to fit in the systems they already have. Either that's already a low-code platform or an SAP platform. And it's not so much that it needs to be user-friendly or developer-friendly, but the most important part is integration-friendly. So it needs to fit into their cloud strategy. So you need to have a very nice Azure launcher. You need to connect to existing IoT systems and not reinvent everything that they probably already have in their architecture. So that is, I think if there's one thing that we've learned over time is that IoT is not an app, IoT is not a system, IoT is most of the times an integration. So so that's basically, I think the first thing I wanted to share, that like what we've learned over the 5 years, which comes from the developer ecosystem. So that's more bottom up, but I would love to hand it over to Ferry, and maybe you can share a bit what you're seeing when you're in these boardrooms and talking to the CEOs and CTOs of these big companies. How do they look on IoT?
So maybe to, let's keep these short because nobody wants to have long monologues, but we looked in 2015 at IoT with a group which is called our McKinsey Global Institute. And we basically said there's between 4 and 11 billion of value, trillion of value created by 2025. So 10 years ago, we said this is going to be big. And what we are doing at the moment, and I cannot share you the 100% the results, but I can give you a flavor, is saying were we off or not? And actually, what we see is we're off. We're about 20%, the market is about 20% smaller than we expected. And what is driving that? And I think there are two big drivers. One is the adoption is much slower than we expect. So we basically see a lot of inertia in organizations to actually do this. They get very excited about a POC. They get very excited a small use case, but then moving from a POC or a pilot to a large-scale transformation is difficult. At the same time, what we see is that if you look at the impact of the POCs, they're actually higher than we expected. So we are at a very weird moment in time where companies who are experimenting with IoT see a lot of value being generated, but at the same time are unable to scale it to the level we expected. So we are, I think where we are at is that actually implementing IoT solutions and getting real value at scale is more difficult than we expect, while the value provided by IoT is high. Now, what is driving that? And we see a couple of things which, again, value is actually bigger than expected. And if you look at things like technology, it's actually going, the technology is better than we expected 10 years ago, than 5 years ago. The power budget you need is much better than we expected. So overall, the environment is actually pretty good. We also see that public policy is actually quite supportive for this. So what is holding this back? And what is holding this back is a lot around managing the value chain. How do you get all the parties to work together around cybersecurity, around privacy? The other thing which is holding us back is change management. How do you get this implemented? And I was actually speaking with the COO of a large manufacturing organization. He said, and I talked about 5G IoT, and he said, Ferry, I have analytics, I have digital, I have machine learning, I got AI. Please don't put something else on my plate. There's so much stuff being fired at me, which makes it very difficult to execute. So there's so much on these people's plate that if you don't come with an easy, and I think Wienke talked about it, an easy way to do this and a way to scale it, it's actually going to be quite difficult. And then maybe the last part to talk about is, we look, for example, in areas in where IoT went actually better than we expected. We see, for example, cities, governments are actually ahead of what we expected implementing, both in realizing benefits and adoption. So a lot of cities like Singapore and some European cities like Amsterdam pushed hard, got it adopted, and actually created quite a bit of value out of it. I'm pretty happy with it. Well, areas where we had high expectations, like what we call that human in our report, but that's basically the whole healthcare space, we actually see that the adoption is lower than expected, because there you see all this privacy, security, value chain, and change management aspects really hitting hard. Well, at the same time, we also see, because of some of the insurance schemes and the way payer and providers work, that the impact for the person who implements is actually lower. So there's societal impact, but there's less value capture. So to summarize, the potential is proven, I think, by all the hard work of all the people on the screen, that that IoT is a real, can generate trillions of value. At the same time, we're at this point of time where scaling it is difficult. So we are on that S curve, and I think it's all around, especially this value chain privacy and how the change management we need to fix. Otherwise, we have a couple of years to go. And actually, maybe last point, we're trying now very hard to have conversations with clients around, can this be a solution for reopening the economy? For example, can automated vehicles help in factories to reduce spread because people don't have to touch stuff? So maybe COVID can be an accelerator for IoT because it really helps to get a problem closed. Wienke, I just hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so that was super interesting. A lot of information. You started with saying you see a lot of inertia, right? Can Rob, can you maybe comment on that? I would love to start off with, because you have a very positive story actually about that. It's coming. We just need to solve a few things: change management, some technology integration. So Rob, do you recognize this? Where's the inertia?
I think IoT would be a lot easier if it was an iPhone, as far as trying to get to sell. It's had a lot of inertia for a long time, as you know, and it's no doubt it's massively underperformed every analyst's expectation dramatically. And yeah, we talk a lot about everybody being in POC hell for the most part, for a variety of reasons. The inertia's there, the excitement's there, everybody sees the use cases. Hopefully people have gotten out of the phase of just doing IoT for IoT's sake. It's not a product. Some of the, and there's a lot of the discussions around what are blockers to adoption, despite the excitement, you often hear security and things like that. I keep running into just economics at scale is what I keep running into a lot. Is, it's great to do the POC, you get a thing working, you see the value, but when you're trying to deploy things at scale and you start adding up the cost of all the components that go together to make the whole thing, sometimes you go, oh, wow, it's not worth doing. The microcontrollers, the sensors, the whatever it costs for your connectivity, servers, clouds, you get the idea. When you add them all together, they cost more money in many cases than the value you might derive from the solution. And so I run into that all the time. And especially it's more magnified, if I'm doing industrial stuff, like when Alistair and I were doing stuff with Hitachi in Japan, it's one thing when you're, the cost, what's the percentage of the cost of adding IoT to a giant machine in a factory in Japan or wherever versus the cost of doing things like agriculture, where I need to get sensors on a farm and everything. And maybe those guys aren't loaded with as much cash as someone who owns a giant factory or a giant manufacturer. And so all these play into it. There's a lot of desire. A lot of people know the value, but economics keep slapping folks in the face, just depending on kind of what industry they happen to be in.
Yeah, I see you nodding, Alistair. Can you second
I
that?
violently agree with all of the above. I mean, I think it goes back also to what Ferry was saying. The promise of IoT, to me, it's always been contingent on it being an extension of existing systems, not a separate island by itself. And I think for the longer, I've seen more, I'm sure we've all seen hundreds of solutions that are great in and of themselves, but they're encapsulated and they're separate and they are, they see themselves as not subject to the same expectation around security, the same expectation around privacy, around authentication, and I think that's been a real blocker to adoption as well. I think the value of IoT is contingent on the ability to kind of fully integrate. That's what Ferry said. Most of IoT is really about doing things more effectively, more efficiently, more for less. And if you don't integrate that into the way that a company operates, then you're done for. I think over the years, and I've been in this space for too long, I'll age myself if I say how long. From the very early days, it was super hard to build things that worked. I think in the last 10 years, platforms have come into being. And Azure IoT is a fine example, and there are others. There are about 500 IoT platforms in market today. and there's probably 10 or 15 that are really, really solid. And those platforms have made it much, much easier for any developer to build an IoT solution, not an embedded specialist, not a data scientist, any developer. I think that what has yet to be addressed is cost, connectivity, complexity, lock-in, cellular deployments, great for some things, but impossible to integrate with LP-WAN, satellite, all of these piece parts are just too difficult to integrate and too difficult to make work together. And I think what you're seeing with COVID-19 is really just it's yet another set of demand and a set of needs that IoT could address, if only it were easier to use, if only it were accessible. So, I mean, I would say, in summary, I think the main reason why we've not seen that hockey stick curve is that actually we've not done our jobs collectively, all of us. We've not done our jobs well in the last 15 years. We've not made this technology, accessible to an average high schooler developer yet. We're getting there. And I think on the platform side, we're kind of there. I think it's the other piece parts in the jigsaw that are just too difficult, and that's integration, connectivity, all the rest of it that I just mentioned. But if we can simplify everything, we can make it drop dead simple like an iPhone, then we'll actually, I think, start to fulfill some of the promise a little bit more fully.
Yeah, super. Fully agree. So Sam, you were mentioned. Can you comment on that? Like, what's your?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
happy to. So couple of things really stood out from the conversation so far, and very much appreciate the dialogue. Something that I've seen over the last couple years that wasn't present, maybe 4 or 5 years ago when IoT was really at the top of the hype cycle, is we see more and more customers and partners that are approaching IoT with more of a traditional business discipline, right? Calculating the return on investment ahead of time, figuring out the total cost, implementing a stage gate process where, like one of our partners actually, they wind up killing about 50% of their IoT projects at various points in the stage gate process when they decide that the value to their own customers isn't going to be worth the cost, right? That's a level of discipline that I've seen in the last couple of years that frankly wasn't present in early IoT. And I'll echo what Alistair and Rob are talking about as well, is that I think that, we're getting pretty close as an industry towards solving some of the major challenges. I think that, we've had a bunch of initiatives. I know many of the folks on this call have as well. Like one of our initiatives has been around IoT plug and play, making devices self-describing and just connecting, and then partnering with many companies, including Rob's, on making all that work together so that a device can simply turn on, home to the right solution, and just, data starts flowing and you can interact with it immediately. It's sort of to us, it's the difference between, before when you bought a webcam, you had to install drivers for it, and now you just plug it in and it works. So very much agree too with the sentiment that you were talking about, Rob. It needs to be as simple as an iPhone. And I think the good news is that a lot of us partnering in the industry, it's getting pretty freaking close to that. And I think that 2020, 2021 is I think it's going to start to be a breakout year where a lot of this value is very clear and the major challenges have been solved, and we can start unlocking what I think Ferry illustrated is a lot of potential.
Quick question here, Sam. Why do you think 21, is going to be a breakthrough year? What do you think might be the key trigger? What do you see?
I feel like, and I'll say it from a platform point of view. Our vision is that the majority of the connectivity challenges, the ability to connect devices quickly and at scale, to be able to have mass market commodity devices with standard sensors, I see a lot of that stuff starting to converge right now. And at the same time, you're starting to see more and more customers bringing that discipline so that, they don't, one of the reasons why so many customers in the early years got stuck in POC hell was because they didn't have that basic fiscal discipline of what's the return on investment, making sure that I target my high value use cases that are easy to do, yet, have a big yield, we saw a lot of moonshots in the early years where it was like, we're going to do a 3-year journey on IoT, and at the end of it, it's going to be amazing. And then, the cost overruns happen during it. And that's not happening as much anymore. So that's where I see like, there's just so many things that are lining up right now. And last, I'd say that, something that we've been doing and many others in the industry have been doing, I've been hearing a lot about simplicity on this call, which is great. I mean, we're getting to the point now with, things like IoT Central where you can simply plug in a device. You don't have to know how cloud works, right? The IoT solution scales. And we're not unique in doing that. There's many of our partners that are on this call that are doing similar things like that. So I think just all of the providers coming up with those easy to use solutions coupled with more business maturity is going to equal, unlocking that potential.
It's funny when you talk about the plug and play stuff. Here's a weird phone analogy. And obviously, Sam and I have thick skin because we lived through Windows Mobile and Windows Phone together. But if I think of an analogy, like before I joined Microsoft, the last startup I'd done way back then, because I'm really old, is a mobile device management company in the early days, back when it was just BlackBerry and built something for Windows Mobile. And that MDM, I often, just personally, I've always thought that mobile device management is very similar to IoT. It's a bunch of devices. I'm getting telemetry from them about their health. I'm pushing apps to them or configuration. It sounds kind of the same, except you got a person on the other end. But that space did not take off until the iPhone 4 came out. And the reason for that is, in spite of lots of great technology and a lot of good, efforts, that OMA-DM standard didn't get implemented by anyone until the iPhone 4 put it in there. And then all of a sudden, you had MobileIron and AirWatch and a million other MDM companies come out of the woodwork because the iPhone made it real. Before that, it was just fragmented. And so I'm often wondering when that iPhone 4 OMA-DM moment is going to happen for IoT. I know that's a bizarre analogy there. But there's something there. Before that, I mean, when I was building a mobile device management platform, I was just calling C APIs on the platform to make stuff happen. So it was really hard. And it reminds me of the Wild West of IoT over all of these years. We're all just kind of writing lots of code and everything. And you're not going to take off and have huge adoption when a bunch of people are writing lots of code and doing their own thing.
Yeah, cool. So like I think Pilgrim, you have witnessed the Wild West of IoT as well. Looking at your resume, it's super impressive. Can you comment a bit on what has just been said, and can you relate to that, or?
Yeah, sure. No, I think lots of very wise words that are resonating with me. Yeah, I think. I mean, it definitely is all getting easier, but I feel there is still quite a long way to go. And I feel that's because, I mean, IoT is going to be an ecosystem far, far larger than anything we've seen before, and I think it's very interesting to make analogies with things like the iPhone, but I think it's also interesting to see where they're different. And I think, I actually often use an iPhone as an example of what IoT isn't, because it is a managed environment and like a server farm or whatever, and that's generally where we've deployed stuff in the past, into things like phones or server farms or telco infrastructure or whatever, very, very managed. And to me, that's what defines IoT, is that it's deployed into the unmanaged world, the real world, where everything can and will happen, and that makes it very challenging. Makes it challenging to manage, but it also means that there's just an incredible diversity of opportunity out there, which is why it's exciting, but it's also why it's challenging. And the homogeneity of the standards that made certain markets take off in the past will not happen anytime soon in most of IoT, I don't think, particularly at the edge. Apologies if you can hear my dog barking there. I think we do see a lot of consolidation happening at the center over the last few years, thanks to primarily AWS and Azure, and I think that's incredibly helpful to everyone. There's the watering hole. We see consolidation in some communications, thanks to the likes of Sigfox and LoRa and so on, and that will definitely help the simplification process and make it easier for people to build their solutions out of blocks that are off the shelf and that work well together. But I fear we still have quite a long way to go. I mean, one of the one of the things I really notice about our customers is that none of them identify as IoT companies at all. IoT is just an ingredient technology that they happen to need, and in fact, a number of them are now creating. So I think there are two kinds of customers. There are ones that are product companies that connect their devices, and they think initially that the connection is just a feature, but then over time they discover that actually it's transforming their whole business, and it turns them into a service provider. But then there are the newer companies, the startups and scale-ups mainly, who are creating new propositions which have to be connected from day one. They just don't make sense if they're not. And those guys have a totally different kind of worldview. But none of those.
Do you have a concrete example of that? So because I think what you're saying, like having seeing it first as a feature, and then yeah, it's ending up as a business transformation. That is the big IoT promise. Like, can you be more? Do you have an example of something that? Yeah.
So you're talking about of legacy companies that are connecting their.
Yeah, that are adding IoT, and then finding out they're actually also transforming their business.
Yeah, I mean, probably one that springs to mind where we're doing a bit of stuff is someone, sorry, earlier on, I can't remember who, mentioned vending machines, which were always the classic IoT use case back in the day. And in some ways they still are. I mean, almost no vending machines are connected yet in percentage terms. And there's still huge potential, I think, and lots of new similar kinds of retail as a service kind of connected offerings coming, like Amazon lockers, and all those kinds of things. And I think if you talk to people in those industries, most of them are still very much thinking, well, they don't think in product terms. I mean, there are people who make the products and sell the products, the actual machines. There are people who offer the service, they restock them, and they make sure they're working. But they haven't quite joined those two things together to deliver sort of vending as a service. That's just not really how they think. If you look at the business models, I think that's what's the most challenging thing about creating this sort of value chains and the supply chains for IoT, is that everyone's business models have to align all the way along. And often, especially in legacy industries, they just don't yet. And so it's quite hard to be selling something like an IoT service, in the cloud or whatever, where you'd be doing sort of monthly fees and SaaS and charging by the message or device, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you've got someone buying something as a product at the other end, and it's quite hard to make those things line up. Whereas the more modern digital customers that we have, like EV charging, or we've got a really interesting customer who does food waste management. We're using machine learning, and they're the kind of company where I just have no idea what vertical they're even in, and yet the thing they've come across is a massive market, and it just completely relies on being connected. So they don't need kind of educating about selling things as a service. They just think like that from day one, because they come from the virtual world, the world of the web and the cloud, and now they're pushing their stuff into the real world.
Okay, yeah, super interesting. Yeah, so I think when we also try to summarize it a bit, is that indeed, like, I think we're trying to build a puzzle, and the puzzle pieces don't fit yet. We have a clear picture on how to make it fit, but somehow we create products that don't really have like open interfaces or open standards, so they're not really like integrating easily. Wilfried, with Wisebatt, you're making one of these puzzle pieces, right? Like it's doing one thing, making one thing way better. Can you comment on all this, like from your perspective of creating this?
Yes, sure. So
doing this one thing very well.
So sorry about being late. So I'm Wilfried, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Wisebatt, and at Wisebatt what we do is basically a marketplace that gather on one side the hardware engineers that are building IoT devices or medical devices, and on the other side the silicon vendors that are pushing their new feature or new components. And we are gathering them within this marketplace around a simulation platform, and this simulation platform allow them basically to explore all the possible hardware architecture and software use cases right before building the first prototype. So just to let you know, I mean, I agree with all the points that have been said, and thanks for all this information. I actually learned a lot. Just some few concern about the fact that the adoption has been slower than anticipated, I think that we've been overlooking the IoT sector from the service point of view, forgetting that behind these services there are actually hardware to build, and even though the off-the-shelf hardware platform are quite good and quite nice to build a proof of concept, it usually requires to have some customizing involved in the process. And at the moment, the stage of technology didn't reach yet the maturity to be able to have something very quick, which means that going from a proof of concept to something that you can deploy, and that's something some of our customers are living at the moment, is something that requires between 18 and 24 months between designing, certifying, having all the stack working, being able to deploy it, being sure that everything is going to work. And even when there are like very highly qualified industrial employees in the process, that can fail after 24 months. So that's from my small, very small and humble hardware perspective from the point of view of a startup, is also showing that that explained about a bit about why the adoption has been that slow. I can have a very simple example. For instance, we've been talking with a car manufacturer and a startup that was developing a LoRa-based actually tracker with a GPS that was supposed to follow the car between the factory and the retail shop. Because you may not know, but they might spend 1 or 2 months out in stored somewhere, and they need to keep track of that. So the company was used to do tracking, but never faced having a tracker put into a car environment, which is basically being very hot, having almost a Faraday cage around the car, and then almost impossible to communicate. So you spend way much power to push your message out of the car and so on. So this kind of stuff were the stuff that were really hard on the technology side. And on the other side of the business, so the customer, the car manufacturer, was expecting this thing to be used as an iPhone, as you mentioned, to be very plug and play. Like, okay, I'm gonna drop that. I'm buying 10 right now, but like in a couple of months, we'll be able to deploy that in every car we are putting out of the factory. And I think that's where at least that's where my expertise stops. Just noticing that there is this miscommunication or misunderstanding about that. And just another word that has been upsetting me. I've been working in the electronic industry since almost a decade right now, and I did my PhD on this topic. And at the time of my PhD, the Internet of Things was called the wireless sensor network. And right before, it was called the machine-to-machine communication, and it started by all of those drink distributors. I believe that maybe, but that's just a maybe, if we want to reach a standard which I think that severely lack for the adoption, at least should be done for the adoption, maybe we should start to be thinner about the description we have on the different aspects of the IoT, which has become kind of a generic word, where we are putting everything that is related to transforming data capturing by a device into valuable business information. But at the end of the day, is way too broad. That's once again, that's only my humble opinion from what I've been seeing. And just to let you know, we've been working with 1,200 different companies, from the startup to the very big electronic manufacturer like Flextronic, for instance. And we've been following them into their journey of building the device, talking with their customer, and having this relationship. So that's what we observe. Like sometimes, for instance, for this car manufacturer, IoT is just a way to have business insights and be able to manage his car fleets. For the startup, this is like the first real use case where it has to customize its hardware in order to fulfill the use cases.
Yeah. Thanks.
And sorry,
Super
that was
interesting.
long.
No,
recently.
I think you're touching a lot of pain points, and what I think what we also see is the more you move towards the edge, the harder the problems become, and I think if you are a hardware startup and you go to a VC, then yeah, like, well, we're not into hardware. That's basically what of course everybody will say. Luckily, it's a lot of fun, so that is good. But I would like to use it as a bridge to Katja, maybe from a VC perspective. Like where do you see? Well, yeah, what do you see? Just as an open question.
Well, it's an interesting thing because IoT has been there for a long time, and there is a lot of promise. We always talk about this, increased numbers of devices and data and everything, but then there are kind of bottlenecks in the whole system, as you have also, all of you touched one way or another on these bottlenecks. So for one thing, we are lacking kind of standards, and there were various attempts to invest in these platforms to connect everything. One of them, maybe you remember, was in the UK called Everything. And there was a big hope that everything will connect all devices, and suddenly we'll have this common denominator that IoT devices can talk to each other, and we'll finally have a working ecosystem. It is hard because it didn't really scale. Many reasons, like there are no really standards, and as you have mentioned, all of you also, actually there is lack of collaboration. Maybe we haven't really created a system that devices would talk to each other, and you just get a set of working tools and you can just use them, and there is a system working. So it's not really, from the investment perspective, I think it wasn't really a successful bet. And then many of the corporates started to take over, the lead on this, and saying, well, we have so many devices. I was at Samsung, and then Samsung, we have so many IoT devices, it's natural that we'll create this, platform and ecosystem that all these devices talk to each other. There are certain challenges also in this approach, because then very often, there is, to build such a cloud platform, you need the know-how from Microsoft, and I'm looking here. So then I think the whole industry has to work somehow together to create this working value chain. One is providing a working cloud, the other one is providing like all devices. And I think this is from the software perspective, where we are focusing at OpenOcean mostly on the software. And of course, our objective maybe in the coming couple of years is to find this solution and working with a lot of players in the ecosystem to connect the dots. On the device level, I think there are many other challenges from cybersecurity, starting from cybersecurity, and that IoT is presenting a whole new level of cybersecurity threat. Before we talked about cybersecurity just threatening our data or money or something. Now it's really a cybersecurity threat to our health even and life, because if someone hacks, let's say, an autonomous car or a device, which is a medical device, which was inserted into our bodies, like to control the heart rate or something, this is a very different level of problems. And I think that today there is again lack of standards and lack of industry, maybe thought leadership in how to make it more secure for everyone. We have seen a lot of issues and challenges already with these medical devices being hacked, and really, all type of things can happen and go wrong. So, and that lack of trust of the society towards implementing those devices is one of the key issues maybe going forward. On the device level, one of the this is the third vertical on the device level. We have a challenge that devices become commodity. Like, even at Samsung, at some point, we were very excited about all these wearable devices, but afterwards realized that actually devices only means to get to the data points and build artificial intelligence. So building actually a functional device is a lot of hard work, but it's becoming obsolete quite quickly. So someone who produces devices has to run really fast. I remember that Samsung was producing thousands of devices per year, like new models of devices, just to keep up with the market. And sometimes it's very hard, especially for startups, to keep up with the speed, just to run so fast, to be always on top of things. So the question is there a model actually to create those devices in a more scalable and less costly way? So these are the issues that we are kind of like when we think about IoT and then bringing this solution to the market, all the challenges that would say, look, it's a very exciting topic, but actually, are we sure this is scalable in a way we want it to be scalable? Just a couple of thoughts, and I want also to maybe come back to the discussion of what's happening at Microsoft and startups, maybe opening this a little bit broader, these topics.
Yes, I think that's so. Again, I think what we're also saying is that once you move to the hardware, it's an enabler for the end-to-end chain, but the hardware is the hard bit, which where you see that maybe over the last 5 years, the investment money has been skewed towards IoT platforms. And as Alistair said, now we have a few thousand, but yeah, probably there's only going to be a few winners. So maybe Sam,
basically, before we go on, for me, hardware is a hard problem, but it's one of the many hard problems. It's not the only hard problem, but it's a hard problem.
Yeah. Yeah, true. But do you agree that it's like in the top 3, or like or do you think that so what is the top 3 then? Like that's maybe.
I think for mass scaling, if you look at mass products, and again, love the reaction of the crowd here, I think it's a problem. But if you look at a lot of the manufacturing solutions, hardware is actually not the problem. So we're doing I think in Australia, there's a big project around connected cows. They're just enabling 600,000 cows with a thing, and it works. So for a lot of the more niche applications, hardware is not the problem, because as long as you talk about hundreds of dollars of savings, the last $5 on the hardware is not the problem. It becomes a problem when you look indeed at cars, because then you need certification, you need that. So for me, the change management, the whole cybersecurity and the alignment of incentives over the value chain are not technically hard to crack, but are emotionally harder to crack.
Yeah,
I agree with this, and if I can jump in, and I think I agree with this point, and I think we need to. This business models actually haven't really emerged yet, and I think this is one of the key issues, that the benefits of overcoming hardships probably are not as pronounced yet. And we talk about many things, even monetization of data collected from the IoT devices, even in healthcare, which is kind of a straightforward use case, like you have data from patients and then obviously you can use it for personalized medicine. This is not really a flying use case yet, although it's very promising, right? So it's something that we need to think about, like where is actually the benefit and business model that is really benefiting all the players in the value chain in Grijpink. So I have interrupted Alistair.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key to it all. And I mean, over the years, you've kind of heard business model, business case, etc. I mean, go back to what Sam was saying. Why has it been so slow? Well, we held out IoT, machine to machine, we called it a separate thing. We didn't call it business as usual. We didn't say it was just part of doing business. And I think if you look at the current environment, I'd agree with Sam. I think things are coming forward. The ecosystem's mature, and we're entering a period of economic hardship. And in economic hardship, people look for cost savings. And what is IoT? IoT primarily is about cost saving or avoidance of risk. And things like COVID-19 just layer more reasons for advanced sensor networks on top of that. I think, when you step back and look at the ecosystem, cloud is mature. I think the developer base is much more mature. Developers want a managed endpoint. I mean, I go back to the very early days of thinking about IoT in Microsoft, and I can remember a very odd conversation with a very senior person in Microsoft, who I will not name, who said, this IoT thing, machine to machine at the time, this is fantastic. All of these endpoints are going to be managed Windows sockets. And I said, well, yeah, that's definitely a good aspiration, but tallying that with
that wasn't me, by the way, that Alistair's talking about.
No, it wasn't you. I'm sorry, I should make that really clear. It definitely wasn't Sam. I think Sam, you were on the other side of the room banging your head against the wall. But tallying that goal of a managed endpoint with super cheap, super small, generic, you want the endpoint to be something that is almost disposable. That we've not bridged that gap yet. I mean, there are some techniques to how you can do it, but they're all still a bit kludgy. The key is the business case. I mean, if you look at markets like metering, so LoRa kind of began in metering. And metering, one of your big costs is someone going and reading the meter. And so if you can take that cost away by form of connectivity, bingo, the business case works a dream. If your business is transporting assets and you lose 10% of them, you know, every month, bingo, your business case is clear. And I think some of the time we've been looking at markets and going, wow, that's really a great fit for the technology. And we've not, as an ecosystem, kind of looked at, well, what's the business reason? What's the business problem that someone's trying to solve here? And what is an appropriate solution for that problem? Because right now, and I think the core of the issue is really interoperability. Nothing works with each other. And if it doesn't work together, separate devices cost money, integration costs money, you know, connectivity costs money. Or if you did have a business case in the first place, all of those factors are just going to destroy that business case from the get-go. So I think business case is the key. You have to hone in on what's the economic advantage and then deliver a solution that's appropriate for that particular problem, not something that's bells and whistles.
If I can add a bit in that direction, and if we look at the value chain per se, there are a lot of actors implied, but the value is only delivered at the final step, which means that that's only when we are avoiding an asset to be stolen or to be lost, or when we are avoiding a replacement to be made 2 years after the equipment has been installed, that the money is saved. So somehow that's also difficult, and I understand the VC point of view, but that's also difficult to monetize data per se, because with the approach of monetizing data, we have the approach of saying, okay, that there's a huge potential there, but for me, it's a bit like thinking about advertising, like you are spraying and praying for people to buy as much as they can when they see the advertising, but you know that most of them won't. In the case of the IoT, I think we are having another challenge, which is basically, we know that it's going to be useful. We know that it will be a 100% hit, because in every device that are going to be deployed, if you are fighting maintenance, doing automation, maintenance automation, you know that all of those devices will fail. That's sure. And you know that if you are connecting them, you are going to be able to plan it, to avoid some maintenance, to avoid some catastrophe. And that's a 100% hit. But it's not going to be right now. It's going to be delayed in time, and it's going to be only visible from the last part of the value chain. And I think that's the point into the difficulty of both the customer and both all the actors to be able to say, okay, but I'm going to provide you some value, so I need to be paid for that, because the result is so much delayed, so further on. That at least that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that relates to what Pilgrim said, is about aligned value chains, right? So like if the value chain is not aligned, you cannot pivot something to, for instance, from a product to subscription service. So then the Ferry, I would like to dive deep into this change management. Like maybe we can, like, would you call it digital transformation? Can you tell a bit, well, like when you're in the boardroom, like how deeply rooted, like, is this where, like,
I'm very wary of the term digital transformation. I should be careful because this is not a important topic. But
we'll erase that out.
But I need to be very careful in saying that no. But take an example of, you know, where I'm describing. There's a couple of places now where, because of COVID, people have installed AR goggles. So experts, which normally would fly to fix a big expensive machine, can now, with an 8K camera and an AR goggles, actually do repairs on machines, which normally can only be done by certified people. But because a rookie get monitored on the ALR level, you can do it with Wi-Fi 6, you can do it with 5G. You suddenly get an IoT type use case, which is very, very interesting. Now, that works now because you have a COVID problem. But now thinking about what to do, you need to train all these people. You need to have the center there. You need to reorganize the experts who now live across the world. They need to go to one center. So all that change management is quite interesting. The other, I worked for a refinery, and in the refinery, they installed alarms for every pump. And normally they would go every week along the pump. They would say, is the meter? And they say, is the meter okay? And it was okay. Now they got every second, they got a reading. So they got 15 times more alarms. because sometimes, like this. So they had to change the way their operating center worked. They need to start logging. So in the first weeks, they had massive amount of more people needed to do all the repairs because they started repairing stuff which wasn't broke. So from installing the IoT meter readers to then getting 15 times more alarms, to then realizing you need a platform and you need to start putting new, that's a whole process to come. So what you see is that it's not as easy to say install IoT in the factory. It requires new operating model, new operating manuals, new training of people. Sometimes, and I think Wilfried talked about it, needs certification from a regulator. So it becomes a whole process which has nothing to do with the technology or even the application. It has all the side effects, and that is holding people back.
Yeah, well, and as you say, it's a process. I mean, the word we often use is a journey, and I think because there are unknowns, because a lot of people are doing this sort of for the first time, whatever they're doing, they have to accept that they won't know how to do everything from day one, and therefore it is iterative, and that, yeah, what you just said then rang so many bells for me. With our customers at DevicePilot, we see so many cases where, they thought that this was their big problem, but once they could see what was going on, they discovered that was a 1% problem, but the big problem was actually, their 50% problem was something completely different. So they were spending their time on completely the wrong things and had completely wrong sort of anticipation of what their challenges would be and where their costs would be and so on. And I think that does, I absolutely agree with what Sam said, that people are now trying to approach things in a much more rational, let's do a business plan and we've got to hit the numbers and so on. However, it is still an exploration because these things are being deployed into real people's lives, into the real world, which is complicated and unpredictable. And therefore, there is a lot of risk, I think, in that process, and it needs to be done in a way where you control that risk and you go through iterations of scale in a controlled way, and you make sure that you're ready for the next stage of scale before you embark on it, to avoid sort of drowning in servicing problems or whatever.
There's a really interesting part of the change management as well that we see on a daily basis. We have the great fortune at Microsoft of working with thousands of enterprise customers, and so we get to see a lot of this change management up close. And there's a really interesting change management process that I've seen. I think, Ferry, you've talked about a lot of it. There's another one that's really interesting, though, and it's that, to Alistair's point, IoT really is about business as usual, but with, more efficient, more effective. And yet, if I'm a manufacturer, or if if I build, water pumps, or if I build streetlights and I'm starting to do connected ones, what's fascinating is that all of the processes that I have in place to build those things don't really serve me well with software. Software has different rules of physics than hardware. And, software is best approached in an iterative way. It's something that you see with hardware companies, that they're used to longer development cycles, right? Where things have to be lined up just right, and they start a year ahead, and then they ship a year later, and things like that. Whereas software tends to be best done in very small increments. So that's one of the discordances that I see as well in this change management process. And the other one too is that, I think digital transformation 9 times out of 10 winds up looking like organizational transformation. So, for example, you take a service engineer who's used to servicing something, and that company then winds up getting predictive maintenance. All of a sudden, what's my role as a service engineer, right? Like, now I have a computer or a cloud that's helping tell me when it's time to service it. There is a real people challenge as well. And that service engineer keeps doing their job. It just becomes more efficient, more effective. Mm-hmm. But that's a big transformation as well. And so, for companies that are undertaking those kinds of things, if they're not clear on what that impact is going to be, they can get unnecessary viscosity inside their own organization, threatening organ rejection from these types of solutions.
I think some of the key is to marry some of the benefits of software with some of the benefits Correct. Of hardware, because you're spot on. The reality of hardware is, and I live in this world now, 3-year, 4-year development cycles. It's nightmarish. But if you start looking at those endpoints as flexible, updatable endpoints, and you start building them into the equipment, because I think we should be spending a lot of our lives talking to people who build stuff. I mean, that's what took Rob and me to Hitachi. build the IoT into the truck. You know, don't leave it as the outside, as an afterthought, or something that was add-on. And those endpoints, I think you've got to approach it in a distributed way as well. I mean, the old central days of centralized control system and provisioning and all the rest of it, you know, doesn't work in massive IoT. There's just too many things. So if you have to make these endpoints updatable, but you also have to make them flexible so that they can switch. I mean, they can switch frequency band, they can switch network, they can switch, and there's no reason in the world that you can't do that, either in the sub-gig spectrum or 2.4, whatever you want to pick, to have a flexible endpoint that can choose its network, that can pull down updates, that can change the function of the device to do something else or something new. And to do that in a way that is friendly to your standard cloud developer, if there is such a thing. You don't have to learn anything special. You just press a button and you push the update. And I think that's the key. We've all been, I think, fixated on the specialness of our own little thing and differentiating, or, well, you know, my thing does this better. No one cares. No one cares. The value is in things working together on a common plane. And that implies a level of genericism. But that's what people want. I don't want people to look at solutions that we sell, or, you know, or solutions that Rob's companies, and go, oh, well, that's different for this reason. You want to look at it and go, well, I can use this in that situation and that in this situation, and I can swap between the two based on business rules or the rules, the requirements, the circumstance. And that's what we've all been missing as technologists, I think. People don't want difference. They don't want special. They want the same, and they want cheap and easy and quick.
If just to pursue with the image and the metaphor we've been using with the smartphones, and I completely agree with you, Alistair. But I think that with this IoT and embedded, let's say embedded connected hardware everywhere, connected to the cloud, we are a bit like the smartphone industry or the phone industry was 40 years ago. Like we find out that there was some room for that. We know that it's going to be something very big. We don't know yet what the form is going to be, and everybody is getting is pushing his guess on what it's going to look like on the market. And I agree with you. If we don't want to do the same mistake that has been done by the phone industry, if I can talk about mistakes, then we better set up standards and set up easy way for the technology to get accepted, because the faster we are going to reach this point, the easier it's going to be, I believe, at least for our customers, to get the value down the chain and to be able to justify hardware customizing, development, product, and so on.
I think some of it's stopping being greedy. And in the cell phone industry, what you saw was cell phone operators think that all of that content revenue was theirs to have, and they sat on it and sat on it and sat on it because they couldn't figure out how to realize that value. And then the iPhone came along, and all of that value walked out the door. So I think greed is a big, you know, a big factor in this.
I would love to.
You know what? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Rob.
No, I just wanted to tie on something that Ferry said. Actually, you were talking about AR and VR and training and things like that. And then we've also talked about COVID. I just wanted to bring to a real quick example about how a lot of that's been made real recently, just because of the weird times we're in. So at my company, Ericsson, we built and opened up a factory in Texas to build 5G equipment, right? Network equipment. The tough part is then we have this COVID thing going on. And normally we would have people, you know, so we had another similar factory in Estonia that builds that stuff. And normally, you know how it is when you open a new place, you have a bunch of people from the other place come and train everybody. But in this case, we built a 5G factory making 5G hardware using that bandwidth and capacity and AR, VR goggles to remotely train the people who are working in this new factory from the folks in Estonia. And it was really cool how it all came together, and it actually worked. You know, I think about big concepts that we're all living through with this COVID thing, and, you know, digital is a word that comes to mind. Remote is another word, things like that. And it's cool that, you know, that in that connectivity that's pulling us all together. And so I think it was great to go beyond talking about a use case like that and making it real, and it's really worked for us.
I think Rob, that's also a great transition, I think, to also find agenda point a little bit more in the future, right? And how do you see now the next 5 to 10 years develop, and also what key opportunities you see generated, right, by IoT. So I think Wienke maybe go a bit into this discussion because we have like 22 minutes left. So I'm going to be, try to wrap it up at the half an hour or so.
Yeah, I think moving there. I mean, touching AR and what you were saying, like key things. So I think challenging this for the future is like, if we're gonna have this same panel in 2025, are we gonna have a significant different discussion? So I see Sam smiling. Sam, are we gonna have a significant different discussion in 5 years? Or what's gonna be different?
Sure. For sure we are. I don't actually think it's even going to be 5 years. Like I said, I do think that we are getting to the point now where, in the next, year to two, that the big rocks at least are going to be solve problems in IoT, and that companies are going to be able to move much faster on opportunities. Like I'll just give, one example of some of the work that we're doing with, with some of our hardware partners, like Azure Sphere, like the ability to have effectively a SaaS offering for hardware, software that runs down to even small microcontrollers where Microsoft stands behind it and updates it and things like that. Like things like that didn't exist. And, and us offering hackers software bounties to find bugs in it and things like that. IoT Central, making it easier to take those Sphere devices, plug them in, you can just immediately start, collecting data. Partnerships that we have with many on the phone, around connectivity. I actually think that we're closer than, we tend to think that, what's far out is closer and what's near in is further. I actually think that we're much closer than we think to being able to unlock the value in IoT. And I think it's really been proved at this point. I mean, I've seen the formula work again and again and again with our enterprise customers, that when, the stars align, that IoT moves pretty quick. It's just getting those stars to align. And I think we're getting very, very close on the technology side. And we're also starting to see the business discipline happening. So I'm pretty bullish about IoT at this point.
Cool. Who likes to comment on this? Alistair. Ferry.
I would say if we're successful, IoT will have gone from being an aftermarket solution to being embedded, and by that I mean, it goes to Sam's point. I look around in my house. I've got 50 things that have connectivity capability. None of them connect to the same thing. None of them connect to the same freaking hub. I've got 3 or 4 different solutions running burger alarms and all the rest of it. Now, so we're kind of at that first stage of, it's becoming a feature of the product. And it's not just consumer product, it's also industrial product. If you look at companies like Fluke and others, they're building connectivity into the product, and they're moving into this hardware as a service model, but they're using that connectivity and the intelligence it drives to change the way they're offering the product to their customers. Still, none of this works with each other. But I think, the realization that it all has to be interoperable, otherwise none of the value is realized, and that if it's not interoperable, all we're doing is putting boulders in the way of customers to adopt, then I think in 2025, if we've gone from it's already in the box to it's in the box and it actually works with everything else, and we're close to that.
Can I be contrarian here, Alistair? Can I be contrarian here? Because I believe that it's in the B2B market, I agree with you. I think in the B2C market, it doesn't really matter. I don't think my scale needs to talk with my fridge. I think that vision of the world that my front door talks with my lights, with my Wi-Fi is nonsense. I think that just needs to work.
May I disagree? Because I think that it's important, but customer doesn't have to know about that. Like everybody, I mean, I agree with the fact that nobody needs to have all of this equipment or furniture talking to each other, but I still believe that's important.
Yeah, I don't care in about.
Now we get debate. That's good. Debate is good.
Yeah. Let's stir
I want
the pot.
it to do stuff, and I think the analogy for consumer is overused, but it's important because it's consumerization of IT. You know, in business, we expect things to be interoperable in the same way as they are in our personal lives. Most of our customers walk around with iPhones or equivalent. They just work. And so I think IoT in the industrial, B2B is where the opportunity for IoT is for sure. But you have to apply those same rules.
I think there is an opportunity for somebody, I mean, if you use the home example, but it works in business as well, for somebody to step in and be the entity, be the brand that makes the stuff work together. I mean, to some extent, that's what an iPhone is, isn't it? It's a managed environment which will let your app work with everyone else's apps. And nobody's really done that in IoT yet, I think, and maybe the cloud player is the best place to do that. But I think there's still a way from that. You know, people often get stuck in the consumer domain. They often get stuck into arguments about standards. You know, is it Zigbee or Z-Wave or whatever? And consumers don't care about that stuff, and they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't even know about it. It needs to just work. But there's lots of levels at which it could just work. You know, it could work kind of by the two devices talking to each other, or them being on the same IP network and your home gateway is doing the management, or by them all being connected to the cloud and they get managed in the cloud. I mean, I think a really interesting ecosystem where this is happening right now is energy. In the UK, you know, I've now got PV that's connected, I've got EV connected, I've got hot water heating that's connected, I've got a smart meter that does half-hourly tariffs and it sometimes pays me to consume energy, and all those things are now connected, but none of them are joined to each other. But that's coming right now. People are starting to build services to manage all those, to massively optimize, you know, my energy use as part of the whole country's energy use, and that's really exciting, I think. And it's, you know, we've been talking about this stuff for 20 years, and now it's happening, and it's going to happen this year. And you know, so I think when the pieces join up, they can join up really quickly.
That's the reason why everything should talk to each other. Just to pursue on the debate, but I'm going to stop being French and trying to have a debate about everything. I agree about everything that has been said. I just think that, well, that's just a thought I have, and that's an open question. But what makes the adoption of other technology? For instance, if you look at cars, that was the fact that there were roads. If you look at trains, that was the fact that we had rails. If you look at phone, that was the fact that we had a network that was pre-existing, and the need of, and I'm talking about the commercial phone. I'm not talking about the initial phone technology. So maybe there is a common denominator in all of the value chain about, each of the value chain part as a part of this common denominator, part of this common denominator, but maybe there is somewhere something that we still need to implement or just figure out and gather in order to get this adoption. Energy is a great example. Like, you need to manage your energy because that's not nice to have, that's a must have in today's world. So that forces the energy industry to get everything connected, and that goes way faster than in any other industry. Maybe we can find something else. Don't you think?
Yeah.
There is a critical moment in the arrival of all ecosystems where being open goes from being impossible to being essential. And I think we're sort of there with IoT.
Just imagine if we had a common data model.
What?
Just imagine.
Yeah. You know what, Alistair said something good about, you resonate with, you know, you talk about the word aftermarket. I tell people all the time, I think IoT is just one big aftermarket car stereo store. And and that's part of the friction that's in the market that keeps us from hitting those crazy numbers that all the analysts have been telling us that we're going to hit, and we've only gotten to a fraction of those. And so if I think about 2025, at least one aspect of it, this goes back to embedded things. It goes back to stop doing aftermarket things. It goes to, it's stuff we certainly worked on at Hitachi. And I know with the plug and play stuff, I know you guys think about that a lot at Microsoft. It's the notion that when my machine, my whatever, is manufactured in wherever, in Shenzhen or something, that the microcontroller, the cellular or whatever network modules in there, the software, the security keys, all that stuff is baked into the machine at time of manufacturing. And then that thing comes off the assembly line and it goes to maybe a distributor, and then the end customer, let's say they're in France. And when they buy that thing and it wakes up the first time, it needs to connect. It needs to figure out, kind of like when you're roaming on your phone or whatever, it needs to figure out, oh, I'm in France, I'm going to connect to this network. And now I've created the pipe, And then the software part has to happen automatically after that. Oh, I determined through maybe an intermediary server or something like that, oh, it turns out you were bought by this customer and they're using this IoT platform and this is the digital twin of this machine. And so that's the shape of my data and here. Oh, and I'm going to redirect you now to your platform and I've already registered you and it's all happening automatically. And we get all those developers and all those configurators and I don't have my conference room table with 50 billion of my best friends writing code to make your device connect to a platform. When we get all that happening, all that friction can go away and we might actually hit some of these numbers. At least that's the hope.
So we have to work towards an end, but Ferry, maybe because you started off like with this, and I think you're trying to pull this towards like change management of the business, and I think the conversation here with this guy is always going into the technology side. So from a then like more boardroom perspective, like how is this panel going to be different in 2025?
My sense is, and I think some of the people are in the corner, there's a tipping point where things become easier, and therefore, the change management aspect become less. I think the other end, at one point of time, we're also going to crack, and I think the notion around I think somebody called the iPhone moment, where you have, infrastructure providers giving you connectivity, a device that easily works, apps that comes together, and you saw that massive explosion. And the question is a bit, how far are we away from that point where these things happen automatically? And I think that is a little bit so, we talk about value chain coordination, use case fragmentation, misaligned incentives, and data complexities. But at the same time, the iPhone was the thing that solved it all. Just like a little bit before, the BlackBerry was the thing that solved it all for the business world when you look at calendaring. Because I don't know who of you had Palm Pilots, Trios, I had all that stuff. And then suddenly I got that BlackBerry and it worked. It was a blast. It just started to work. So my question is, and therefore hardware is incredibly important, like Wilfried is saying. If you've got a hardware which just makes it work, I think that could be a big pivot. So I think we are very close to the tipping point, and I think some of the work you guys are doing on cloud also makes it easier. And Wienke, I think if you take a combination of cloud, IoT, and pluggable infrastructure, I think we can really get to the tipping point in which in 2025 we say, hey, we underestimated the market.
Just to add philosophical thoughts to that about hardware and software, and once again I can only highlight the fact that even though IoT is a huge added value on the services part and is relying on a lot of software, the key element within the IoT is the hardware. So we need to take into account that it has a completely different pace. So one of our customers used to say, in software, done is better than perfect. So you get to iterate this way. And in hardware, perfect is the only way to be done. So you have to go right at the first time. Yeah. So that summarizes my just the point or my contribution to this debate, the fact that you need to keep in mind that there is hardware underlying.
Yeah, then it has to work. And I think you can abstract a little bit with, I mean, we've got lots of tools now that we didn't have, like the ability to actually implement software-defined radios and introduce, but the underlying hardware, you're putting things in the ground for 20 years. It better work. You need to be able to update it and reach it and touch it. But it better work.
That's the only difference that I would state. I think, Wilfried, that was very well said. But once the hardware is done, the software has to be evergreen on that thing. Always up to date, always secure.
Sure, completely agree. And the progress we've made on the firmware over the air and all of this update management. I remember like 4 years or 5 years ago, uploading a firmware through Bluetooth connection with an iPhone was a nightmare. That was like completely, a disaster, like really disaster. Now it has been mainstreamed and you have no issue whatsoever. You can even do that from a web app. You can even have a web app that is doing a firmware over the air, which is great progress. I believe we are going the same way onto the the hardware application layers.
Yeah.
Cool. Mike, I think I'm going to wrap this up. Do you like? I think we're almost out of time. I think it was a great conversation. I think like the consensus is that we're at the start of this. Like we're gonna. I think Ferry said it as there's a lot of inertia. We still see that all the puzzle pieces we have and all the technology components are not super interoperable. But I think Sam was also very clear in saying that we're really seeing that happening. And once everything starts to click together, which also highly reduces the total cost of ownership. I think mentioned by Rob that like stacking all these different services and technologies for a complete end-to-end solution still makes it very expensive. And then once that happens and the notion of what digital transformation IoT can bring in the boardroom, that definitely should be something. So let's agree that in 5 years we have the same panel, and we'll look back at so I hope everybody can commit to that. Maybe we'll all be on an island because we were right. Or I don't know, but then so. If anybody wants
it's not a problem to Zoom from an island, so we can do the same panel for them virtually.
That just works. Yeah. So I would love to wrap it up like this. If nobody has like a very pressing final thought or something philosophical, Wilfried, do you have a final?
Thanks to everyone.
Thanks
to everyone. It was a great discussion. I was really happy to be part of this and have a lot of respect for all of you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
that's
great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.